Welcome to Reclaim, a podcast for women, by women, on conversations that matter. I am your host, Thais Sky, international speaker, teacher, and a certified life coach currently working to become a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California. Join me here every week as I offer thoughts and interviews on what it means to reclaim your humanness in this messy world. Hello, everybody. Thais Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the podcast and welcome to my newest series, The Art of Depth Coaching. This is part 2 of the series. Now, you don't have to listen to the series in order, but I do recommend you going back and listening to part 1 if this episode resonates with you. In part 1, I share the biggest coaching mistakes that coaches make. I share some of my own story, and I talk about the power of supervision. So you can check that out in part 1. In this episode, we're going to be talking about burnout. I want to share my thoughts on coaching programs. And in part 1, I talked about how coaching is a relationship. So in this episode, I want to break down what I mean by that and how we can navigate that. Okay, so where do I want to start? Let's start with, I get this question a lot on my Instagram and also in my emails. People reach out to me saying, what coaching programs do you recommend? And I never know how to answer this because I haven't taken any other coaching program aside from my first ever coaching program 10 years ago. I did the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, and in that program, you learned coaching skills, you learned business skills, and you learned food. And so I felt once I graduated from that program that I had enough coaching skills to start my coaching business. And I've taken a few courses here and there, like a few little mini courses. But to be frank, I haven't really been satisfied with many of those courses and programs. Now, I do think that getting your initial coaching certification program certification is important. I think it's important because just because you want to coach doesn't mean that you have the skills to coach. And I think going into a certification program where you get some basic knowledge, some basic skills, and some basic know-hows of business is important. Even if you've already been kind of coaching people, even if you already have a pretty well business acumen, even if all those things are true, getting a certification is important. It's an investment, it's hefty, and it's important. Here's why it's important. Because our skill set as a coach will determine our success in our coaching business. Again, like I said in part 1, coaching is an unregulated field. Anyone can call themselves a coach. But if you want to actually create a whole career around coaching, if you're willing to give up your job and the security that comes with that job in order to be a coach, yeah, you need to take this seriously. No other industry can you just quit your job and go into it and expect to succeed without getting any additional accreditations and training and support. Even if you're confident in your skills, getting that certification and putting that on your website tells people that you are serious about coaching. Now, most people don't give a shit about where you got your coaching certification program. So this is less about whether it's recognized. I mean, I know that the ICF, the International Coaching Federation, tries to act as if it's some sort of regulatory body. It's not. And most people who aren't in the coaching world have no idea what ICF is. So I would focus your energy less on finding a certification program that's well known, and focus more on finding a coaching certification program that is in alignment with your values. So if your values is very social justice oriented, or trauma oriented, then finding a coaching program that is in alignment is important. So that's the first thing as you're entering this field. Yes, go and do trainings. Now, once you've done that initial training, this is where we can get stuck. We can get stuck in this mindset of doubting our coaching skills, not feeling confident in our coaching skills, and feeling like if we just do another training program, if we just do another more specialized program, that's where we're going to get the confidence to become good coaches, right? The confidence comes from getting one more accreditation, one more certification. And that is a worthiness issue. That ties into the worthiness wound, where the fact of the matter is no program is going to give you the confidence that you need, because confidence doesn't come from learning through a program. It learns from doing and practicing and making mistakes and fucking up and trying again and doing it better over and over and over again. And one of the best ways that we can expedite our learning curve is by getting support. And that is, of course, where my mentorship comes in. I'm doing this series in honor of this newest offering that I've created, which is a mentorship opportunity with me. The cool thing about this mentorship opportunity is that it's unlike anything else in the coaching industry, where either one-on-one or as a group, you're going to be bringing in your specific challenges about your clients. You're going to be bringing in recordings. You're going to be bringing in the dialogue that you two are having, and we're going to fine tune your skill set. This is an extremely intimate process where I am going to give you guidance on how to cultivate your own intuitive prowess as a coach. This isn't about learning how to coach like me. This is about learning how to coach in your zone of genius. And the best way that we can do that is to have someone with eyes on your work. The cool thing about coaching, or maybe not the cool thing, the unique thing about coaching and therapy and a lot of other one-on-one modalities, is that no one really is a witness to our work. Unlike other jobs where, if you're working in a restaurant, for example, like your work is in front of people. In the coaching world and therapy world, your work is not seen by others. And so how do you know that you're actually doing a good job outside of the feedback that you get from your clients? Which honestly, sometimes they don't even know what feedback they're giving you, right? So the best way that I have found personally for me to become better at my craft is having this space, a group where I get to bring in, this is my challenge with this client. This is what this client said, and I had no idea how to respond. My client did this when I said this, and they did this, and I got completely lost. All of that, bringing that into a space and having the conversations of what was going on for you in that moment, what was happening in your body, what do you imagine was going on for them? What if you had said this? How do you think that would have landed? And get that support. So that's what mentorship is. If you want to learn more, you can go to my website, thaisguy.com/mentorship to learn more. You can also go to the show notes. But after that initial coaching certification program, I am weary of the coaches who are just keep going to more and more trainings without doing the backup work, right? Without doing the work of actually expanding their coaching business and seeing their one-on-one clients. Because again, your skill set as a coach is the most important part of your coaching business. Period. I don't care if people tell you that the most important part is the business aspect. If you don't have solid programs that's backed by your art of knowing how to coach, if your programs, whether it's courses, whether it's digital programs, whether it's whatever, isn't grounded in the skills that you develop as a one-on-one coach, how do you know that that's going to land? Again, this is what we talked about in part one. Just because it lands for you doesn't mean it's going to land for other people. And learning how to cultivate that capacity of knowing what will land for more and more people is an instrumental part of building your coaching business. So my recommendation, and this is mine, you take it or leave it, is build a one-on-one practice. Get really comfortable understanding people's pain points, understanding what drives people, understanding what hurts people, what's harming people, what's challenging for people, and then build a course off of that rather than building a course or a program off of just your own experience. That is a course that's going to be more full, that's going to be more dynamic, that's going to be more impactful. Again, though, it all starts with your one-on-one work. And so this dives brilliantly into how to prevent burnout with one-on-one work. One-on-one coaching burns us out because it requires an intimacy with self. Holding space for someone's pain is hard, particularly those of us who consider ourselves to be sensitive or consider ourselves to be empaths. Oftentimes, and I've talked about this in my podcast, hypersensitivity and empath is really unresolved trauma, right? It's trauma where you were taught to not have boundaries, where you had to take people's energy in order to understand if you were safe. So while it can be a tremendous strength in that It gives you an opportunity to really understand how people are feeling. And a lot of empaths and highly sensitive people go into the type of work like healing work, coaching, therapy, etc. We want to be really kind to making sure that we're getting our own support, whether it's through something like mentorship with me or specifically like therapy or coaching, because unchecked empath is really just unresolved trauma flinging around, right? So one-on-one coaching can burn us out because it requires an intimacy with self, an intimacy with boundaries, an intimacy with our capacity to hold people's pain without making it be about us. And if we're empaths, somehow we're making it be about us because we're feeling so much. And so being a space holder, holding people's pain, requires us to get intimate with our own pain. If we are blocking off people's pain, trying to distance ourselves from it, that takes a lot of emotional energy. That takes a lot of barriers that will lead to burnout. Now, I have to preface all this and say that burnout is natural in any industry. Any industry, particularly an industry where you're caring for others, burnout is a part of the conversation. That is okay. We want to be, I don't want to pathologize or make it seem like this is a bad thing or that somehow you're not doing enough or that you're broken or something's wrong with you for burning out. No. You can burn out even if you love what you do. You can burn out even if this is your purpose. You can burn out because this is work and it takes work, and that's okay. So we're not saying that there's anything wrong with burnout. However, if you notice yourself consistently burn out, if you notice that it takes a huge toll out of you every time you sit in front of somebody, then there is a point for us to get curious. Now, in grad school, I learned this concept of vicarious trauma, which is that when somebody shares something traumatic with us, we can actually become traumatized. It's like secondhand trauma. That is a thing that happens. And it's important for us to be aware if that is happening to us. Again, as I said in part 1, even if we're not as coaches necessarily doing trauma work, because you don't have to necessarily do trauma work in order for your work to be effective and to be supportive for whatever that person is going through. I think trauma work is important for all people that have trauma, but I'm not saying that all coaches have to be doing trauma work. No. However, we have to be aware of when trauma comes up, what may happen to us as a result. That is important. Again, because vicarious trauma can lead us to burning out. Taking on people's pain can lead us to burning out. Okay, so what tends to happen, right, is because one-on-one coaching requires a lot of intimacy with our own pain and a lot of intimacy with our own capacity to hold space for another. What we often try to do is we'll do like a group program or we'll lead courses instead. And listen, we all are allowed to have what we like to do. Some of us like to do courses more than one-on-one work. That's okay. Obviously, that's totally fine. However way you structure your business is totally fine. What I'm inviting is if you love one-on-one work, but you're pulling yourself away from it because it's so burdensome to you, this is for you. This is who I'm talking about. Because we don't want to bypass this. We don't want to skip this if there's information here for us. Or else you're going to just be building group programs without the foundation of the one-on-one work. So if you are feeling like you want to be doing one-on-one work, but it's hard, let's talk about that. Here's something that I know to be true, is that we must have our own container where we feel safe to talk and explore about what's coming up for us in our one-on-one work in order for us to not burn out. That type of space can be instrumental in helping us get curious about what's happening instead of getting overwhelmed by what's happening. Oftentimes, what we just lack is structure, right? If you think about an actual physical container, in order for us to have a container that can hold other people's stuff, we have to build that container. And oftentimes, we just don't have the tools to build that type of container. Because the truth of the matter is, we're not meant to hold other people's pain alone. That's certainly what I thought, though, as a coach. When I started being an entrepreneur, it was a very lonely experience. And I had a group mastermind that supported me in the business aspect of it, but I didn't really have support around the one-on-one work, which is wild because the one-on-one work was my bread and butter. It's what I'm committed to. It's what I'm passionate about. It's what I love. And now I recognize through having gotten this type of support, this type of mentorship support, is that what we're missing when we don't get that type of support is the capacity to really learn how to build that container for ourselves. How can we model to others, right, that they should be getting support if we ourselves are not getting support to help them, right? Something to be thinking about. So one of the ways that I like to ground myself in my coaching work is recognizing that the coaching relationship is a relationship. This is an insight that I cultivated in grad school, and this is the approach that I take now in my work, is that I used to think that, people would come into my coaching work and they would bring all their pains of their relationship, because most of the time what people are seeking support around is their interpersonal relationships. And so they would be bringing in their challenges in their relationship, and we talk about it, right? And we process it and we explore it, et cetera, et cetera. Now I have the training to understand that oftentimes, the way people do anything is the way to do most things. And so if they're having interpersonal challenges in other relationships, odds are they're having interpersonal challenges within your relationship. Again, because the relationship is a relationship. You're not just a coach. You are in a coaching relationship with your client. And so if they bring to you feelings like they tend to avoid things, they tend to avoid problems, and you're starting to notice that pattern, that they avoid conflict, or they avoid telling people how they really think and feel, or they avoid confronting people when they've hurt them, odds are they're doing that to you. Even if they're not aware of it, which most of the times they're not. They're not aware that they're doing that to you. But like I teach in Worthy Women Rise, our relationships from childhood create a neural pathway, like an imprint, a working model of how relationships go. And that working model then gets translated into every relationship they have in adulthood, for the most part. There's, of course, complexity and nuance here. But for the most part, this working model is how they understand almost every single relationship. And so they're going to be bringing that working model to you. Now, in part 1, I talked about the difference between process and content, and how the power of the relationship happens in the processing rather than the content. Well, how do we get to that process? We get to the process by bringing it to the here and now. What's happening right here, right now? Because let me tell you what, talking about how it hurt when they, talked about, let me ground this in an actual example. Okay. When somebody talks to you about how hurt they were that somebody said something to them, that is now an emotion that's once removed. So yes, they can access that emotion, and then they can do, you can process that emotion. Of course, that's the majority of the work. Because I'm assuming you're listening to this because you like depth coaching. You want to go deep with people. You want, to get to the emotions. You want to get to the core of things. You like to tend to the deep wound in a person's psyche. And so if you're going into that deep healing work, then you're going to be talking about difficult emotional experiences that they've had in other relationships. If they bring that into the relationship, that's where most people stay at, processing that, which is powerful in and of itself. Of course it is. It's very difficult for people to have the space to process their emotions. They mostly don't have that space in other areas of their lives, because most people in our culture don't know how to hold people having emotional experiences, right? And so our work as coaches is to offer something really different, to offer the space to do that emotional processing. And again, this is where it's really important for us to be getting our own support, because when we're inviting people's emotions, they're going to be activating our own emotions. Of course they are. Emotions is the language of connection. When people bring in their pain, we're going to be experiencing our own stuff. If for example, we're supporting someone grieve the loss of their mother, it's going to activate the parts of us that we have experienced loss in. Of course, that's going to happen. And so getting your own support will allow you to then continue to hold space for them processing the loss of their mother without it being now about you and your loss, without you getting so consumed by your own feelings. And most of coaching is being consumed with our own feelings if we're not careful. Most coaching is spent on thinking if we're doing enough, isn't it? If we're constantly in doubt about our work, and that can take up a lot of space. It's very hard for us to listen to somebody and actually be present with them if we're being in our own heads about whether or not we're doing a good job, right? Okay, so being able to hold an emotional container for people requires us to do our own emotional work. Okay, so having said that, it's powerful to have that space where somebody can say, yeah, I've had this challenge with my friend and I avoid conflict and I've avoided telling them how angry I am with them. And now I'm trying to process that anger with you. That's powerful. Good work. The next layer of that can ground this work in even deeper is by igniting the conversation around how that may be happening within your relationship. Now, this is an advanced skill. This requires a really grounded capacity of having somebody express feelings about you, towards you without you getting reactive. Because what we're inviting here is for us to say, so I hear that you have this pattern where you typically avoid sharing with the person how you really feel until it really blows up. I wonder how that may be happening in our relationship. I wonder what you may not have been telling me. Do we see that? Now we've brought this important working model that this person has been operating with unconsciously their entire lives, and we're now bringing it to light in a very potent way, because now it's right here in their face. They're looking at you and they are dropping into feelings that they have not been allowed to feel, because if they've been allowed to feel it, they wouldn't avoid the issue. In that moment, we are confronting the working model head on, and we're creating a space for different possibilities. So instead of the coaching work just being, okay, this is your homework, this is how you're going to confront your working model within these relationships, that's powerful, but we're making it even more powerful by bringing it into the relationship. Now, I must add many caveats to this. The first one being not everybody is ready or able to have this type of work happen. So you want to be dancing with it gently. You want to be playing with it gently. You want to notice which of your clients are able to handle this type of conversation and which aren't, because some people aren't. It can be very confronting. But the people who are, that can be really cool, because they can start to see even more viscerally how their patterns are playing out. And because the coaching work, there is this sense that you're not friends. At least I'm hoping if you're doing depth work that you're not doing it with friends. If we're doing depth work, we need to be holding a stronger frame. And you know what? As I'm thinking about this, I feel like I need to bring this up in part 3. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to talk more about that in part 3. But that means that they can put a lot of stuff on you and project a lot of stuff on you. Like, I imagine that this is your life. I imagine that you're successful, and I imagine that you're always happy. And instead of blocking that, instead of saying, no, I'm human, I don't have that. Let's work with it for a minute. That's interesting that you imagine that I'm always happy. I wonder, why do you imagine that? And then dig into their fantasy, their image, their projection of you, and explore why they have that projection of you instead of just knocking it off or correcting them, right? I love this work so much. There's something so fucking brilliant and powerful when us as coaches and healers can get inquisitive about the person's psyche instead of always trying to correct them. I'm not saying that eventually you don't say, well, I'm not always happy and I do experience struggles and I wonder how it feels for you to hear that. Of course, that may be where you go. I'm not saying that you need to present, in some like pretend like you're something that you're not. I'm just saying that before we respond, what if we can get curious as to why they're experiencing you in that way? So making it be about the relationship, recognizing that there is a potency in this relationship can be really cool. Now, you may feel like because this is an advanced skill that this is not accessible to you and that you would have no way of knowing how to use this skill. Well, first, I teach the skill in my mentorship. So if this is something you're interested in doing, by all means, come into the mentorship. But there is a way that you can at least be thinking about your clients in this way without actually it being about bringing this into the work. So even if you don't necessarily say to this person, like, you know, you talked about how in every relationship you avoid, I wonder how you're doing that in this, even if you don't say that, keeping that in mind, keeping in mind that because they're saying that that's the way that they're relating to everyone else in the world, odds are they're probably relating to you in that way, can be useful in the work, right? So even if you don't bring that up specifically, knowing that that's probably the case and creating a safe space so that, you know, they can feel when they're ready to bring that into the space can be really, really beneficial. And I'm actually going to be talking about this in part 3. Okay, I'm going to talk about, because I think that there's a lot that we can explore here. Okay, so what I'm speaking about here in giving people space to like have feelings about us, even if it isn't about us, is a concept that is well known in the world of psychology, but not very well known in the world of coaching. And I think that that's of detriment to the coaching world. So I'm going to introduce it, and maybe it's relatively new to you, or maybe, you know, you've heard about this before. If you've been in your own therapy, your therapist may have brought this up before. But it's the idea of transference and counter-transference. So transference is an unconscious phenomenon, right? Where a client brings their feelings that's usually about their parents and they bring it onto the therapist. So it's a redirection, right? Usually to a therapist of emotions that they felt in childhood. So, for example, I'm actually being this super personal and make it be about me for a minute. In my own therapy, my therapist has really beautiful, really strong boundaries. I grew up in an environment where I did not have boundaries. And in order for my mother to feel like she was loved, it meant me not having any boundaries. So I grew up not being taught how to have boundaries. And that has resulted oftentimes that when people put up boundaries within me, it tells me that they don't love me, right? That's how it feels. That's not the truth, but that's how it feels. And I've been doing a lot of work of tending to that. So my therapist has really, really strong boundaries. We start our sessions right on time and we end it right on time. Like not, you know, like very, I don't want to say rigid, but very healthy, clear-cut boundaries. Now, boundaries, as we've talked about on the podcast, can be tremendously useful because it's kind, right? It teaches people how you want to be treated. And so I've gotten an idea of how my therapist wants to be treated, and I'm very respectful over time as a result. But it has also brought up for me a lot of feelings that my therapist hates me. My therapist has never said to me that she hates me. She has never, ever implied that she hates me. Her ability to listen and attune to me is remarkable. Now, as I've mentioned, I think maybe once or twice on this podcast, like I'm in analysis, which is a type of therapy where I'm actually in therapy 4 times a week for 50 minutes. So therapy 4 times a week, 50 minutes. I mean, that's basically like 4 hours of this woman listening to my problems. And yes, my analysis is very traditional in that I'm lying on a couch. The therapist, she is out of eye gaze, so I can't see her. I'm just lying on a couch and I'm just talking, and she will occasionally respond. And I can talk about analysis, you know, in greater depth later. But what's cool about analysis is that it's really about the unconscious. And it's been so helpful in informing me in my work. And so much of what I've learned in analysis, I infuse in my one-on-one coaching, as well as what I will be teaching in my mentorship, because I think it's so potent. Obviously, I'm not teaching anyone how to be in analysis. That requires extensive education and training. I'm just saying that it very much informs my lens in the ways at which I see things. Okay, so anyway, so, you know, she listens to me for 4 hours a week. And she's so kind and gracious, and the way that she reflects to me, I mean, it's just so clear that she's listening to me, that she loves me, that she's paying attention. And yet it feels very unshakable to me that she hates me because of these boundaries. And so we've talked about it. And we've talked about it, and we've talked about it. That feeling, that's transference. The fact that it really doesn't make sense in person, it doesn't, like when you look at it, it doesn't make sense that she would hate me. But the fact that I feel that way, it means I'm transferring feelings from my parents that I felt towards my parents to her. This is worth exploring. This is really helpful. Because again, we're talking about the working model and shifting the working model and doing it interrelationally, doing it in the relationship can be really useful for people. It's been really useful for me. Okay, so do we understand the idea of transference? It's basically when people bring their ideas of who we are to the room. And they're doing it whether they know they're doing it or not. The cool thing is you can work with that. Not even maybe interpersonally, like I said, maybe that feels too uncomfortable for you, but certainly in how you then want to do the work as a coach. You need to be informed by people's psyche. Being the same to every single client, there's something to be curious about that because every client is going to be bringing different issues. Some clients are going to need different things. There's a flexibility that's required in that. And if you're being the exact same coach with every single client, you're missing out on a lot of information that they're trying to tell you about how they want this work to be most supportive to them. Transference is information. It tells us so much about how they understood their childhood, even if they have no words for it. And so you can welcome it. You can welcome it by asking, as I talked about before, or you can simply observe and take notes and track your client and notice how they respond and how they do things. There's so much information there. Okay. Now, the cool thing about transference is that there is then countertransference. Countertransference is how we respond to their transference. Now, I gotta add that this is amazing because this is predominantly working unconsciously, and we don't ever really see it unless someone else points it out. Because it's unconscious. That's the whole point of unconscious. And if you're doing work of exploring their depth, of their wounding, of their pain, of their challenges, and if you're trying to tend to their childhood wound, if you're doing any type of inner child work or anything like that, hello, transference and countertransference is happening within your relationship. So countertransference, a lot of people define it in one or two ways. They define it either as the coaches, the healers, misdirected energy towards the client. So just the exact opposite of transference, right? So transference is what the client puts on us. Countertransference is what we put on the client. I tend to not use that definition of countertransference. I continue to use that as transference. The healer can ask transference towards the client. The client can ask transference towards the healer. And I use countertransference to mean specifically when the redirection, the response that the healer has to the client is directly connected to their transference, right? So there's a connection. The countertransference is like a counter move of their transference. So often, without knowing it, what many transference, one of the more popular transference, countertransference that happens in relationships is a mothering dynamic, where the client is the child and the healer is the mother. And unconsciously, there's a relationship there where the coach, healer, therapist, teacher feels the need to be a mother to the client, feels the need to baby them, or I don't know. I really can't even give an example because it's so nuanced and it really depends on the relationship. But then the popular, what the healer is responding to is the transference of the client towards the coach, because so many times, we have complicated relationships with authority figures. And yes, as a coach, you are an authority figure. You may try to diminish that authority as much as possible, which is wonderful and what we want. We want to kind of level out the power dynamic as much as possible. But power dynamic is still there, inherent in the relationship. And so typically people bring in their complicated relationship with authority, and it's directly connected to their relationship with their first authority, their predominant caregiver. And so then that's going to probably play out between the two of you. Knowing this is extremely helpful because when we collude with a client's transference, when our countertransference is so strong and we don't even know and we get wrapped up in it, we're preventing healing because we're playing out the exact same dynamics that they know. We're playing into their patterns. This is useful because what are we doing as coaches if not breaking people's patterns, right? So we want to be really aware of when we're colluding, when we're in that countertransference, when we're not in observance and recognition of what is happening unconsciously in the dynamic. I'm telling you all, this is everything when you're doing depth work. This is how we prevent burnout because now we're so curious as to what the dynamic is instead of getting caught up in the dynamic. This is what I'm offering in my mentorship that is so unique that has never been seen in the coaching world. It is really, really cool what happens when we start to do discernment of the relationship. Again, we have to start to see our coaching relationship as a relationship, which means our shit is going to get played out too. All of our working models and all of our understandings of relationships is going to play out in the coaching relationship, probably more subtly because we're aware that this is a different relationship, but it's still going to be there. And so there's a dual processing that gets to be in place when we're doing one-on-one work. The dual processing is we can get support around what's happening for the client and also what's happening for us around the client. What are we feeling when the client brings this up? Is this countertransference or is this transference that we're putting onto the client? The more we untangle ourselves from this relationship, the more we get to start to break the patterns that's been keeping this person stuck in extremely challenging interpersonal dynamics. This is healing work. This is really cool. And this is everything that I have seen to be most effective and instrumental in creating radical change. And have you noticed, I haven't even started talking about trauma yet. That's going to be in part 3. In part 3, we're going to be talking about frame, what boundaries. We're going to be talking about what it means to be trauma informed and how trauma may be showing up. And yeah, that's going to be the final of this series. I'm only doing 3 parts for now. But let me know how this series resonates with you. Let me know if this is useful for you. If you're interested in transference and countertransference, I mean, there's so many incredible books about this, that you can Google because this is a very popular topic in the world of therapy. And there's been so many books written about it. And I highly recommend it. Even as a coach. There's this amazing author. His name is Irvin Yalom, Yalom, and he's written a book that I really enjoy. I mean, he's written so many books, but he's written a book called The Gift of Therapy. And it talks about the skills that he loves as a therapist. Now, granted, being clear, as coaches, we're not therapists. However, there is a specialness in our capacity to hold space for our clients that I think can be very therapeutically aligned. Because therapy is a well-researched, well-backed, evidence-based modality that supports people. And let's tap into that. Instead of getting obsessed with mindset coaching and just talking about mindset, let's tap into the world of psychology that is so rooted in hundreds of years of evidence. Of course, we have to name that psychology is based on colonialism and whiteness and white supremacy. The fact that it was kind of founded by a bunch of white men. I mean, there's a lot of issues with psychology. However, if we are space holders, if we are doing depth work, it may be helpful for us to also access what it means to hold space for somebody in a modality that has been doing it for a long time. Okay, so it's called The Gift of Therapy by Irvin Yalom. Really recommend it. And of course, if you're interested in learning more about mentorship and actually using this stuff in practice instead of it just becoming another theoretical thing that you learn, go to ThaisSky.com/mentorship. There's only 2 spots in the group. I keep it very small. It's only 4 of us so that we can get very intimate with you, doing that dual process of both processing what's coming up for you as well as what's coming up for the client so you can show up in your most best self as a coach. This idea that in order for you to be successful in the business, in the coaching world, you have to be a business coach is bullshit. I've created an extremely thriving, successful coaching practice based on one-on-one coaching and my group program. And I don't do business coaching. Even this mentorship is not business coaching. Sure, it might come up a little bit, but it's not, that's not what this is. None of this is rooted in business coaching because I don't think that that's the only way we can be successful and make money. We can be successful in this world by rooting in our skill set as coaches and doing really good work and confronting our own worthiness wound as it comes up. And that's everything that I understand about this work. And I'm really excited to support you even through this podcast, through Instagram, however way, through the mentorship, in guiding you, becoming the best coach for your clients. Because we need this. We need healers. This world needs us. So get out of your own way. Get out of the doubt and just do it already. Just do it already, as if it could be that easy, right? I recognize it's not that easy, but I also recognize that it can be that easy. Sometimes it just requires a decision and then continually checking in from that decision for us to make the changes we want to see in our lives and in the world. So I'm rooting for you. I'm really excited that you're listening to this, because if you're listening to this, it means that you really care about your coaching work. And that's the shit that I'm talking about. That is what this industry needs, is coaches like you. And it would be a damn shame if you don't put yourself out there. I'm sending you my love, and next week I'll be back for part 3. Thank you for listening to Reclaim the Podcast. This podcast represents the opinions of Thais Sky and her guests to the show. The content of this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental disorder.